What is an oligopoly? An oligopoly is a market structure dominated by few sellers, each offering a similar or identical product. It is a form of imperfect competition in the market, meaning it is not ideal for consumers. Firms are not as competitive as they would be in perfect competition, which can result in a lack of innovation and stagnation. Note that a duopoly is an oligopoly, but specifically with just two dominant sellers in the market. An oligopoly has four key characteristics. Firstly, there are few sellers. Few sellers control a large portion of the market. These sellers are also interdependent. Due to each firm's large market share, individual decisions by any one of these firms, such as shifts in the selling price or rate of production, will have effects on the others. To maintain their market share, other firms will have to respond accordingly. For example, firm A lowers their selling price, so firms B and C must lower theirs. Barriers to entry also exist. The cost of entry into an oligopolist market is quite high. The existing firms are larger and more streamlined, having a cheaper means of production due to the likes of automation. This can make it extremely difficult for new firms to compete, as their cost of production will be higher and therefore their products will be sold at a higher, less popular price. Finally, there is extensive advertising. Firms must keep advertising campaigns up to distinguish their products from those of the other firms. Due to the interdependencies of these firms, it is in their best interest to cooperate and agree on what price to sell their products at, but also a lower output so as to keep demand high. This is referred to as collusion. When firms are colluding, they are said to have formed a cartel. Collusion essentially allows firms in an oligopoly to become price makers, acting as a monopoly and thus removing any degree of competition from the market. Governments must intervene in the best interests of consumers to prevent collusion and cartel formation. Most countries have competition authorities and competition laws that prohibit this activity among firms. For collusion to work, there are some requirements that must be met. Firstly, demand in the market must be somewhat inelastic. This means that quantity demanded does not respond strongly to price changes. There must also be few available substitutes. If there are other sellers that exist outside the cartel, then their prices and output will not align with the cartel's, and so the colluding firms will be ineffective at creating a monopoly. Lastly, the cartel members must not try to cheat each other. Squabbling among cartel members can cause these agreements to collapse entirely. So where can oligopolies be seen in the real world? Well, there is a duopoly in the aircraft manufacturing industry, namely Boeing and Airbus, who are the only producers of commercial aircraft in the world. Also, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper are estimated in 2011 to make up 85% of the soft drink industry.
Very few large firms are included in the market structure of oligopoly. These large firms would be better off cooperating with each other in order to be efficient and maximize their profits. The firms follow their own self-interest. In other words, the firms try to avoid entering the monopolistic market structure. These firms also try to prevent attracting government intervention, as this would cause more firms into the market, making it more competitive. In an oligopolistic market structure, equilibrium has a tendency to not change dramatically in the long run. The market structure used is called the Kinked demand curve, first introduced by Paul Sweezy in 1939. The Kinked demand curve provides an indication as to how firms in this market function in order to compete with other firms. The demand curve is shown in this diagram, which also equivalates as the average revenue these firms produce. There are two sections in this demand curve, including elasticity and inelasticity. If a firm increases their prices, the cost of production will increase, and competing firms may not follow. This firm may lose their market share, as customers will switch to the competitors, providing a more affordable prices for their goods and services. This part of the demand curve is known to be price elastic. If a firm decreases their prices, firms will follow, making the market more competitive, causing an increase in demand. This part of the demand curve is known to be price inelastic. If the Kinked demand curve is correct, no firm should have the incentive to increase or decrease their prices, as they are maximizing their profits as well as dominating the industry with the other few competing firms. This phenomenon is known as price stability. Although the kinked demand curve is not necessarily as simple as it seems. Firms may engage in non-price competition or other forms of collusion in order to differentiate their products from other firms. Take, for example, the company Apple, who produce unique products in order to attract their customers who are willing to pay more for a specific product.
Myerson defines game theory as the study of mathematical models of conflict and cooperation between intelligent, rational decision makers. It's the study of how individuals behave in strategic situations, and we use it to analyze the economics of cooperation. It originated in efforts to try and understand games such as poker and chess, and it is relevant to any situation that requires strategic interaction. Oligopolies would of course like to achieve a monopoly outcome. This would leave them with the most money. Achieving a monopoly outcome is very difficult as cooperation is needed. Game theory is helpful as it allows us to better understand the behaviour of oligopolists. In any game, there are players. In game theory, the players are the firms. These players have to review the options and make decisions. The players must make strategic decisions. These are decisions where each player, when deciding which option to go with, considers how others may respond to that option. The option they choose can also be known as their strategy, and like any game, the option or strategy that the player chooses will lead to a result or an outcome which is called a payoff. The firms, or players, know that their opponents also have to make the same decision and choose the strategy to go with. These decisions will in turn lead to a payoff. This requires the player to put themselves in the position of their opponent before they decide on a strategy, as they know that their profit depends on both their strategy and the other player's strategy. The prisoner's dilemma helps us to further understand this theory. The Nash equilibrium was developed by John Nash, born in 1928 in the US. He was a mathematician and an economic theorist, and his astounding and original ideas dazzled the world of mathematics in the 1950s. A Nash equilibrium is a situation where economic actors interacting with each other each choose their best strategy based on the strategies that the other actors have chosen. Players in a game know that they can't predict what the others will do. Each player knows what they want to do and what will benefit them, but they also know that all other players are thinking this too. Nash's work was based on the thinking that each player should try and put themselves in the position of the other players. The Nash equilibrium is where no player can improve their position by choosing any other strategy. Nash's work proves that in the long term, cooperation of firms or players would be best. Nash's life story was depicted in the film A Beautiful Mind, which is based on the book by Sylvia Nasar.
The Prisoner's Dilemma is a paradox decision analysis, a game between two captured individuals which illustrates why cooperation is hard, even if it has both mutually beneficial to both oligopolies. For example, Mr. Blue and Mr. Green were arrested for shoplifting, but they are both suspected for armed robbery, which was a more serious offence. Interviewed separately to ensure no collision, they were both offered the following deal. If you confess to armed robbery and implicate your partner, you may go free. Your partner will receive 20 years. If both confess, no testimony or no cause to trial, and you will both receive 8 years in prison. You must think in the prisoner's dilemma. You must think what is best strategy for you, regardless of the other person's strategy. The rules of the game. If Mr. Blue and Mr. Green both stay silent, they both get 2 years each. If Mr. Blue and Mr. Green both confess, they both get 5 years each. If Mr. Blue or Mr. Green confesses, and if Mr. Blue or Mr. Green stays silent, either one will get 1 year or 20 years. Prisoner's dilemma and oligopolies. The tension between self-interest and cooperation shown in the prisoner's dilemma relates strongly to the tension between firms and imperfect competition. As a result, game theory and especially prisoner's dilemma has been applied extensively to oligopolies.
The firms in an oligopolistic market may attempt to collude or form a cartel with another firm to maximise profits. However, this leads to those particular firms having an unfair advantage and can cause other firms to drop out of the competition that is the market structure. Due to the advantages a firm can obtain through acting as a monopoly, strict regulations were put in place. In 2012, the official journal of the European Union was drawn up and detailed the limitations of firms' autonomy regarding choices and strategies they may take. They may be unable to maximise their profits or achieve their most beneficial outcome, as it can prove difficult for firms in an oligopoly to cooperate in a successful manner, as previously discussed in the prisoner's dilemma. These regulations were put in place in order to ensure equality and fairness among firms in an oligopoly. For example, if one firm completely maximises their profits for a certain product in a market, then the other competing firms selling that product don't really stand a chance. There are some controversial actions and strategies that exist within oligopolies that many people believe are forms of outlawed behaviour. The act of resale price maintenance can be seen as trying to diminish competition. This refers to smaller retailers selling a product for less than the sale value that was agreed upon by the wider retail company. Low prices in the smaller retailers may attract customers and decrease competition with other firms. In this way, many people see it as punishable. However, this argument remains opaque. Tying is another questioned act done by firms in an attempt to increase their profits. Tying refers to firms bundling their products together in order to increase profits. People don't like this as they feel it forces suppliers to buy extra products, but many argue that the suppliers will only purchase this bundle if the price of the two products remains below their maximum willingness to pay. Predatory pricing is perhaps one of the most debatable actions in this area due to its ambiguous effects. Predatory pricing is when a firm reduces their prices to below cost, which in turn reduces competition in that market. If another firm follows suit and lowers their prices to regain competition, the first firm generally never emerges better off from this strategy. In this way, many argue that in doing this, a firm is not attempting to limit competition nor improve their profits. To prevent other firms from entering a specific market and destroying the possibility of a monopoly for one dominant firm, the threat of a price war can be posed if challenged or met with another competing firm. In this case, there are a small number of outcomes, or payoffs, that can occur. If both firms play their cards right, they could both benefit a lot from this through drastically increased profits. This is what the laws and legislations prohibit. To prevent any monopolistic characteristics from existing in an oligopoly, laws and legislations were drawn up at the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. Here, the European Union and the European Commission came together and devised a set of rules and regulations that would be imposed on firms to prevent unfair competition and promote perfect competition. This entails the banning of cartels or collusion of any sort, along with outlawing any strategies or actions that may limit competition. For example, reducing prices, price fixing, limiting production, or taking control over all resources required for the production of that product. Therefore, these laws that were drawn up provide protection for other, less dominant firms in an oligopoly, but also for consumers. The effect of monopolistic characteristics on consumers includes a lack of choice in the market for a particular product. Monopolistic characteristics in an oligopoly also lead to prices that are too high and a very little supply. This market outcome is inadequate for consumers to buy from. The government and the European Commission have the power to enforce any laws or regulations that have been drawn up to promote a perfect market. Their role is to investigate any suspicious monopolistic activity within an oligopoly. They have the power and rights to view any information or data kept by firms. This is why it is very important for firms to document all strategies, choices, and actions taken, as it may be required to prove their innocence if an investigation takes place. On top of that, the Commission also has the power to impose fines or penalties on those who are seen to be breaching the conditions of the treaty. They can do this through the common law and the court system if required. To conclude, an oligopoly is a form of imperfect competition and is characterized by few sellers, interdependent firms, barriers to entry, and extensive advertising. Equilibrium in an oligopoly can be shown on a kink demand curve in which firms in this market can achieve maximum profit. Game theory is the study of how individuals act in strategic situations. Nash equilibrium is a situation where individuals interacting with each other choose their best strategy based on the strategies that others have chosen. The prisoner's dilemma illustrates how oligopolies may struggle to find balance between self-interest and cooperation, even though it may be mutually beneficial. Public policies are enforced in order to ensure a perfect competition exists within the market structure. There is an ongoing debate regarding certain actions and the appropriate response to those actions. Overall, oligopoly can be seen as a very successful market structure when utilised correctly.